So welcome back on the home stretch here. I feel like we've covered things from a lot of interesting angles so far this weekend. It's really all about having fun playing with your own experience and letting yourself discover that, that there's really opportunity there, endless opportunity, just in the very simplest, most mundane, most ordinary aspects of experience, which we've looked at, every which way, every which way on Sunday. And yeah, great. So this is our last little bit together, and anything we haven't touched on that occurs to you, we can poke around at it and have fun with that.
I have an experience that I'd like to see what you have to say about. Let's see. So if I am suffering, I don't even count it as suffering. I can change it into something else. I can handle what comes at me. But I have found that if I hear that someone else is suffering somewhere else, I can't touch that. I can't change it. And that actually seems to cause more suffering. Like, I don't know what that's about.
More suffering for you?
I suffer more
right.
with something I can't see.
Right.
I can't touch, I can't know.
Right.
I just heard about.
Sure. Well, it's a fantasy. It's just like when you're watching a movie and something very sad happens and you feel sad and you start weeping. There's nothing sad happened to actors. It's a pretense. And yet you feel sad because you visualize it and then you identify with the visualization.
But why? I think that I'm missing something. There's something I'm not getting that is allowing that to happen, I think.
Well, you're believing the fantasy. It's not that, like, suppose there's a tidal wave, somewhere in let's say in Indonesia, and 10,000 people are killed or homeless in horrible straits, and you can imagine that must be horrible for them. But you can't know it was horrible for them because you didn't experience it. All you can know is your own experience.
Maybe it's the imagination that is the key, because in my own life, if I suffer, I'm not imagining what's happening.
Right.
I know what's happening.
Yeah, it's easier to work with direct experience because it's easier to penetrate it through your fantasies of it to the actuality, and then it opens up, and then it actually you're more free of it. But with someone else, you can't. You don't have anything to work with but the fantasy itself. So,
okay.
But it's a projection. It's not that it didn't happen. It's that you don't know that it happened. You can feel. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you think about it, what you feel about it, but you can't really know.
So it's not actually part of my experience.
Exactly. It's not part of your experience. So it's not a reality for you. So a reaction you have to it is a simulation. You project yourself of, oh boy, if I was in that situation, that would be horrible. But all of which is hypothetical because you're not in that situation. And then when you're in some situation, say you're in a difficult, say you're in your house burns down or you're in a big car wreck or something, someone else hears about that, they're not feeling that difficulty, that suffering or pain, whatever. So they can't know what you're feeling. They can imagine, and they might project into it and feel terrible. But that would be them reacting to their projection. They're not reacting to you.
Definitely, that's what I'm doing. I know that I am doing that.
Yeah.
Just don't understand why that occurs. But
well, it's probably it's the way you're used to thinking, the way your mind is used to going. So it's like the switch is turned on for these kinds of things to seem to be actual and seem to be relevant for you because you're used to, your mind is used to going there, so it goes there easily.
And I feel, I'm gonna say wrong, which is, I know it's a trap right there. It's wrong to discount the suffering of others, so that is perhaps where the trap is.
Right. Well, you can look at that.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of discounting it or not. It's that it's your job to help it where you can.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if there's a flood somewhere and people are suffering, and you feel like doing flood support work, sending money or whatever, I don't know, then that's helping them. That's being constructive in the situation. And you can say, boy, that must be horrible for them. And fine. But for you to project their suffering, you're not helping them at all.
Right.
And all you're doing is hurting yourself in a way. I mean, you're not actually hurting yourself, but it's needless to take that on. And yet, the mind can do this because basically it's anything can be fantasized and believed and identified with, and then it becomes like a virtual reality for you. It's just like a movie. Movie's like a virtual reality. You see a sad movie and you start crying. It's virtual reality, and you're reacting to it as if it was real. And that's why the emotional reaction. So it's a question of discriminating between what is actually real and what is real as a real fantasy. And then you can look at that and say, oh, well, that's there, and boy, that would be terrible. That must be terrible for them. It would be, if I was there, that would be terrible for me, I imagine. And then, but you don't need to, you hear someone breaks their arm, you don't need to, put your arm in a cast and walk around in pain and take painkillers for a month. That would be silly, but because you didn't really hurt your arm.
I think the key is the idea of something being wrong. That's what I have to look at.
Yeah. Right and wrong is very interesting. Right and wrong is very interesting, and it's easy to go to a kind of a simplistic value judgment with that. And so, I think it can be very valuable to look at those kinds of things. But it's not important whether you're doing it or not. The main thing is to see it. See what it is.
What I'm doing, this is just coming up now. I'm suffering and for no reason.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's not constructive. It doesn't actually help anybody.
It must be somehow it's got me there, because I feel that I need to be concerned.
Well, I think a lot of our psychology, it's easy to have kind of subtle, sort of basically codependent interrelationships where we think we're supposed to support other people's situation by being emotional and taking it on ourselves. And I think that's just a kind of a twisted way of thinking that we become educated with sometimes in family structures and in society and things like that. And again, it's not so important whether or not it happens. The main thing is to see it. But you see, as you say, you're aware of it, and that's great.
Okay.
So, and the more aware of it you are, the less entangled you are in it.
Right. So then it just becomes another expression.
Yeah, it's another thing that's there. It's another thing that's your nature that you tend to do.
So we can just look at it.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to change it.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
This stuff is all about, you don't need to change it. Nothing needs to be different than it is. Okay. But what's freeing is seeing what it is. Just see it. You don't need to change it. Just see it.
Right. Okay.
If I tend to fantasize a lot, and I get lost in the fantasy, it's not like I need to stop doing that. Just see that I'm doing it, and then all of a sudden I know, well, I fantasize a lot. It's kind of a reality check, and then that puts it in perspective. Then it becomes a realistic perspective. It's like a real reality check.
Yes, I definitely see what you're saying there. So that's good.
Yeah, great. I mean, all this stuff's about reality check. You know, because the whole way we screw ourselves up and complicate our existence is by confusing the actuality of what we're experiencing with what we're interpreting as being in our imagination. And those are two separate things, but we sort of smear them all together. We're seeing what we're seeing, and then we're thinking what we're thinking about it, and we sort of think it's all here, but it's actually two separate things.
Yep.
I noticed that in my experience, things seem to happen at relative different speeds. You know, like if some things that we discussed this morning are buzzing and moving around faster,
yes.
and other things are more crystallized or seem to be more.
Yeah.
And when I transition from one moment to another, like we ended up this morning and we went out for lunch, or you know, go to the washrooms, or I blink a little too hard, and then it snaps back, or it seemed to snap back into that more crystallized world. And then indeed, if I go and look closer, it starts being more. I guess I still have some worry about that sort of crystal structure, you know, like.
Yeah, it's again, it's not important to change it. It's not that there's anything wrong with that. Just see it. That's a perspective, and you can go to that perspective, and you can go to other perspectives, and it's not like there's a value judgment system where one's better than the other, but they're both, but one isn't better than the other, and the other isn't better than the one either. So it's just different ways of being with this. And different times, you know, you can see things as being very slow, and you can see things incredibly, you know, and it's just different perspectives, and they coexist, even though they seem very contrary, and they seem to alternate or whatever. That's just the way it is. This is very slippery with itself, and it tends to sort of dance around itself. It sees this, it sees that. It's almost like your focus of attention. You know, if you look at anywhere in your focus of attention, you sort of notice different things. You think something and you feel something, and you remember something and you feel something, and you know, it sort of dances around relatively. And likewise, these different perspectives, the mind spontaneously dances around between them, like you described very well. And again, it's not a matter of changing it, or that anything's better or worse than anything else, but just see that happens. And that's just part of the slipperiness, the unresolvability of this, that it presents itself in so many different perspectives. And then just discovering that there's virtually no limit to these perspectives. There's just, you know, so many possible perspectives. And they all can happen if they happen. But there's no hierarchy. You know, there's no value scale or anything like that. The point is just to see it. See that it can be like that. It can look like that.
One way of feeling another value judgment for me is being bored. I'm bored with a certain fixed way of experiencing things.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with having preferences. You can have a certain perspective that you enjoy more. You know, maybe you enjoy a more interesting way of being with things, and you find other ways boring. That's okay. But again, you don't need to change that. You're free to change it. But if you change it, you see you're changing it. And if you want to change it, you see you want to change it. You know, if you're bored with it and want to change it and you can't change it, you see that too. Just see it. Just see whatever it is, and see your reactions to it, and see your preference, and it's all okay. It's just a seeing. And then if you're motivated to do something, it's okay. Then you see that, and maybe you succeed or maybe you don't. You see that. Because it's all just different possibilities. You know, different possibilities of perspectives, different possibilities of participation, you know, or failure, participation, whatever. It's all just different possibilities, and you just watch that and see that that's here too. That's here too. This can happen. This can happen. And then, you know, you can play with it, and you can seem to. You know, well, I kind of like it this way, and I kind of have some ability to navigate that, and then so you can do that, and cool, you see that. And maybe you don't have an ability to navigate, but you wish you did, and you see that. So, so however it is, and however you are with that, even if you're, very much trying to steer it or wanting something or whatever, it's all good. You just notice it happening. Just see what it is, and when you see that, you'll see that whatever it is, again, you always see that it's more than you think it is. So it's the seeing. It opens the doorway. It doesn't matter, even if you're looking at being bored, look at being bored, and all of a sudden you're off and running somewhere. And it's not, again, don't look as an antidote or as a solution, even if it becomes a solution. Look just to look. It's like being a pure scientist. The attitude is a pure scientist. You're just really curious. What is it to be actual? What is it to be a being? What is it to be a human? And you just look, you just watch it and say, oh, this is amazing. Look at this. Look what happens. And look what I want and I can do and I can't do and my failure. And I'll just look at it. It's just amazing. Like you're chronicling it all or something.
You had to assign a percentage in your ordinary day. Just for fun, would you say you're 15% human and 85% other? Where would you place your experience?
My experience. I don't know that I could put it in those terms.
Yeah.
I would say it's a kind of it's an unquantifiable multitasking.
Uh-huh.
It's sort of multiple strata and dimensions sort of coexisting, and it's not really percentages.
Yeah.
It's sort of, there's sort of the waves on the surface, and then there's the schools of fish swimming underneath, and then there's the deep sea creatures way down deep, and it's all kind of there, and the sort of the noticing or the coming to the forefront of these various, dominant flavors or aspects is sort of arbitrary, but it's all kind of coexisting.
Mm-hmm. If we invited you to speak about, let's say you had carte blanche, which of course you do, to speak about these things, but not from a human behavioral point of view. And we have these talks and it's all my suffering, the end of my suffering and my thinking and my feeling and the shit that happened to me and how I want it, it's like, okay, pass. So if you had carte blanche, how might you wish to convey, your experience or the promise of that experience without it having to be tethered to human behavioral choice making?
Yeah, infinite, an infinite continuum of degrees of patterning to degrees of unpatterning and everything and everything in between. Transcendentally appearing with, sort of fractal spin-off implication of each of these levels, but they aren't really levels and they aren't really discrete. It's kind of a spectrum, and yet it's sort of a quantum thing where there are kind of quanta, virtual levels that are actually continua, and it never really settles down into either or. I don't know, that wasn't very lucid.
That's good. That's good. I mean, we realize, human language, of course, is narcissistically driven, right, to the bandwidth of our experience. So if we open up the field to a reflection upon what else this is, besides having to be tethered to the human, what vocabulary might we use? Yeah,
to me, it's all about patterning. And there's nothing but patterning, and there's all scales of patterning. And patterning is intrinsically infinite. So there's heavy-handed, let's say more or less heavy-handed degrees of patterning, each of which is actually infinite. So again, so what do you do with that? And everything and anything whatsoever that you can think about, talk about, experience as a perspective, as a anything, is just that. And you kind of arbitrarily, heavy-handedly collapse it down to some degree of somethingness, in spite of the fact that it never actually is that. You know, it's just this continuum of virtual patterning that is intrinsically not.
Yes.
While not being not. Well, not need to be not.
No.
You know,
Yeah. And is there a seat? Would you say there's a seat of your or the awareness that is in full appreciation of this palette?
it appreciates itself. It looks at itself, and that is also implicit in this spectrum of patterning.
So this sense of I, me, my that we average human beings filter through is present and not present in your experience. I'm sure it could certainly be present, but it maybe doesn't have the same implication or heaviness, or it doesn't.
Well,
resolve.
what I once would have called I, me, mine. Is here, but it's not that. It's just again, it's just more of this implications of patterning.
Yeah, it's neat. I mean, experience is occurring, and so there's this complete conviction that it's occurring to what the likes of me, whatever that means. I mean, it could mean body or mind or who knows, but the irrefutability of experiencing is so, and it's got to be occurring to me, right? If I'm the sole inhabitant of my experience, then there's this, what would you call it, a sense of identification or ownership or anthropomorphization of the fact that this is so.
Sure,
right?
That can be so, but that itself is just a rather heavy-handed pattern. There's not actually a subjectivity or objectivity.
Mm-hmm.
There's just objectivity. And an objectivity can present itself as arbitrarily seeming to be polarized along all kinds of different axes, among which can be subjective, objective axes, among which can be, just any kind of axis.
Right. So that reflexive subjectivity in your experience is light, non-existent, or you might characterize it in a different way. If it's only objectivity, right?
Well, there's as much subjectivity as there ever was, but it's not subjectivity, it's this.
I see.
And there's as much objectivity as there ever was, but it's not object. So the polarization is there as much as it ever was, but it's not a polarization. It's just.
I mean, that could be construed in the the literature as the liberation, right? Liberation from suffering.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
But it's all about discovering what's actually here, which is this infinite fractal patterning, being itself. Yeah. And its being itself is its knowing itself. Yeah. It's not like it's an object and there's some subject looking at it, or vice versa.
And so you don't occupy that view as a subject.
No.
Yeah.
And yet it occupies itself as infinite degrees of what can be called subjectivity to objectivity and anything in between.
Profoundly lightheartedly, I would imagine.
Yeah, intensely. It is actual in that its actuality is its intensity.
Nice.
So it's light, but it's light heavy isn't an axis either. Yeah.
So I mean,
a lot of good that did, right?
No, that's great. I mean, with that degree, of let's refer to it as immersion, and even immersion is somewhat misleading because it suggests something or someone immersed in some other thing, right? So if it's here's a blasphemy, non-dually, right? Not subjective, and the collapse of myth is occurring. Where am I going with this? So there was a question in there somewhere, and of course, blew it out my own ass.
Well, just to address that, it's not that it's non-subjective.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's non-objective. It's just that subjective and objective aren't actual categories that apply. So what you might think of as subjective and what you might think of as objective are actual, but they aren't them at all. They're this. And not in an apologistic way of it's all one,
right?
But it's all this.
Yeah.
And this can seem to be that if you parse it heavy-handedly.
Well, it's fun. And so the intelligence or the awareness of what we're referring to is has no gap, has no otherness.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet it can have infinite degrees of otherness.
Sure.
I mean, the way you've heard me say this, the way I put this is it is infinitely differentiated from itself, but it never departs from itself. Which of course is not explainable.
Yeah.
Is that akin to the relationship between the patterning and the patternlessness? Like how do you stack up if there's only infinite patterning, how does the patternlessness?
Patternlessness is just an aspect of patterning. Patterning is patternless. You know, again, we think of those as a polarity, but it's not. Because patterns are made of infinity.
Right, which is unpatterned.
Yeah. Signal is made of noise.
So it's the
So
same.
there's not a signal to noise polarity.
So it's akin to saying, oh, you're talking about subjectivity, objectivity. You could slide to one end of the bandwidth and say there's nothing but objectivity, as you say. But you could slide the other way and say there's nothing but subjectivity.
Kind of, except there's no ends.
No ends.
It's not like you can actually.
It's a monopole.
Yeah, it's a monopole. It's exactly that. It's a monopole that is infinitely differentiated from itself, without departing from itself. I mean, you know, I mean that very specifically, but of course, if you try and wrap your head around that, ain't gonna happen. But there you go.
So would light be another word for patterning? You talked
Yes,
about
yes, exactly so. Or you might say energy. I mean, light in a broader sense. Yeah, sure, absolutely. And you find this, you see the same thing whether you're sort of from a quasi-human perspective, you look at it as objective, you look at it as the structure of matter, you look at it as substructure of personality, you look at it as structure of, you know, interpersonal systems, societies, you look at it as biospheres, you look at it as solar systems, you look at it as galaxies. It's just different readouts, different displays of exactly the same thing, which is basically patterns of infinite light, you might say. And since the light is infinite, the patterns aren't really patterns, which doesn't negate them being patterns. So anyway.
In the George Clooney movie we saw, the message was there's a world to save, and let's get to it. Right? Is there a world to save?
No, absolutely not. The process is in full effect to the extent it's a process. Everything's right on track, you might say, if there wasn't a track and an everything.
So the interest and the motive to have these conversations and make this such a rich part of your adult life is not driven by that there's a world to save.
Oh, no.
Uh-huh.
It's beauty. It's beauty.
Well, there's a world to save relates to Pat's question. It's that same thing, is it?
Well, this relates to, I think we were talking earlier, was it us? I think we were talking a few days ago about, in fact, in the Zen Den or something, we were talking about how peculiar it is that, an individual energy system has its nature. Every energy system has its nature, even as that energy system is infinite.
Yeah.
And that is a very strange thing. You are the way you are, even though you are everything and you are infinite. And which is different than me. I am everything, and yet I am the way I am.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's that whole.
Yeah.
So it's like the art of your skillfulness as a presence, as a being, is to be your flavor.
Yes.
Actively. I mean, not that there's a difference between actively and not, but that's what it is. It is that, without literally being stuck being that. It just happens to be that. And so like this stuff that I do is that for me. It's my flavor to do this.
Yes.
I guess that's kind of a way to look at it.
And is it is it through its self-differentiation that it engages with itself? Or
Yeah, to the extent that's actually happening, because that's a partial perspective. In one sense, there's no engagement. And yet, of course, all this apparent engagement is exactly that, yeah. It's kind of like when you dream, you're engaging with yourself through all of the elaboration, which isn't really there, and yet seems to be there.
So when you point at that, I seem to be able to feel the dreaming as a stuff. From within the dream, at least as I remember it, and from outside the dream, at least as I perceive it now. So there is that stuff that is doing itself.
Right. Yeah.
Is it? And that seems clearer than what I also perceive something here. It is not the same exact nature.
It's actually exactly the same. I mean, it may be different, but it's exactly the same. Yeah, I mean, there's a basic stuff, as you say, a basic thing that is doing itself that looks like any sort of a system that seems to be happening, like a dream or your physical experiential field right now, or whatever, which is actually this, as you call it, this one stuff that is doing itself that happens to look like that, without actually being that. I mean, in other words, it's not. You aren't in this. This is appearing because you are, and you can't put that into like a spatial orientation. It's not like you're here and it's here, or you're in the audience and it's on a screen. Although you can put it that way symbolically, but it's not actually like that, because there's no relationship. They're one and the same thing. The unfolded version and the infolded version, there's no unfolded and there's no infolded, and yet it may look like there is. So that makes absolutely no sense, but there you go.
That's like saying there's no continuity.
Yeah, there's absolutely no continuity, and there's infinite continuity. So anyway.
I like that you aren't in this. This is here because you're here. I believe that's what you said.
Yeah, you aren't in it. It's not in you. It's not that kind of a thing. And yet, so you're not limited to this. This isn't limited to you. And yet, because you are, this is.
Sounds like a riddle almost.
Well, it is. I mean, all of these things are basically, they're like riddles. They're like koans, and that's sort of the point of riddles and koans, is to touch the flavor of this kind of the intrinsically paradoxical nature of this. This is paradox. This is pure paradox. Paradox is its mode. It is different than itself and the same as itself infinitely. It is nothing and it is everything infinitely. I mean, all these things are just, these absurd riddles, and it sounds like, a Zen master or some, silliness. But in terms of trying to really say it like it is, that's really saying it like it is, which makes absolutely no sense. But that just points up the fact that what's here makes absolutely no sense. This is not logical. Logic exists within this as a pathetic pretense of addressing something, failing utterly, because this is not logical, this is not rational, this is a completely irrational, impossible, paradoxical actuality.
Do you know what it's for?
It's for itself. It's for you. You are it.
Why is it not
and again, it's just paradox again, but why is it not closer to say that, so I'm not in this, this is in me? Why is it closer to say this is here because I am here? What's the difference between, why is it not close? What?
Well, in implies some kind of a spatial. Any of these things to say are useful to say,
Right.
but they're not literally true. They can be useful. You know, for example, you know, it's typical for someone to think, I'm in my body's in the world.
Right.
So you feel very contained and small.
Right.
In that context, it can be a very useful thing to say, you are the space of your experiential field, and the world appears in that. So the world is in you.
Right.
Not because that's literally true, but because it counters, you know, it's a sort of an antidote. It cancels out your normal mindset and it gives you the potential of sort of a short circuit.
But if I say that to myself, that I'm not in the world, the world is in me, if the Trojan horse of the word me in my own saying of it contains,
Of course.
doesn't have a wall or a meanness or a spatiality, that is touching on it, yeah?
Sure. What you feel as me is true,
Right,
but look at what it really is.
right,
Try and find a wall, try and find a floor, try and find an anything,
right,
try and find a nothing.
right.
And yet
Something.
meanness, your meanness is the main thing.
Right, it doesn't actually get more me than that.
Yeah, and that's for real. But it's not anything you can think of. It's not anything you can think it is.
Right,
And yet, you know, when you look at anything, you find everything. When you look at the meanness and really see what it is, you find this.
right,
When you look at an aspect of a pattern and you really see what it is, you find this. You know, when you look at otherness, you really find this. So the point is to get, you know, to get to the actuality, which is so far beyond any normal human mode of thought or logic or the way we're used to holding things, that it can't be got. You can't get there from there. You have to go directly, and fortunately you can go directly from anywhere because everywhere is that.
yeah,
But you have to see what the anywhere is, and then you discover it's that.
yeah.
That's why I always emphasize just looking at experience. You know, because anything actual is the actuality,
Right,
and is the way the actuality is the actuality
right.
being the actuality. So if you let yourself see what it actually is.
Okay, so two analogies, and you have to pick one that's closer, given that none of them are going to go right. So just in terms of what we're talking about, patterning and unpatterning. So say one of them is the dream, so that you're in a one room in an infinite mansion in a dream, but you're just in the one room.
Mhm.
You can imagine in the dream so there's rooms that go on for infinity,
Mhm.
but I'm in this one. And so in the dream analogy, the room next door won't show up until I walk through that dream door and it shows up.
Right.
It'll be put in front of me.
Right.
Oh, so it's that, and the other analogy is like a desktop with infinite programs open on it, and you're hollowed down into the one program, and when meanwhile infinite programs are open on the desktop.
The first analogy is better, but it's not right.
Right. So that's
Because
yeah.
How to put the room you're in is a readout,
Right.
Of something else that's not the room and you're not in it.
Yes.
And yet the readout is that too. And
Right.
that wasn't very useful. Was it? You know, I always trying to talk about this stuff is so impossible. That's what makes it fun and
Yeah.
exciting, of course. Which is why I usually try to be more pragmatic about being with one's experience, because then one can stumble on it directly for oneself, non-verbally.
Yeah.
Because of course, you know, non-verbal
There's
is
like a good metaphor that's closer somehow for me will always have a feeling tone of being closer, because like, oh, that just I can't say why that
Okay.
feels more right.
For dream matter. Here's a good metaphor using a dream. The dream is there, the dreaming is there. You're there in the dream. You're there as the dreamer. And that you can't find any of those things. You can't find the dream. You can't find the dreamer. You can't find the dreaming. And yet they're all that. They're all right there. That's the readout. The readout is that they're all there. It looks like that, you could say.
Right.
And yet when you go looking for it, it's not, none of those are there. Which is why I like to, it's a good readout, sort of pops into my head every time when I try to sort of, so it looks like this, but it's not. But it looks like this because it is what it is. But there's no linear correlation whatsoever.
Yeah.
So anyway, but you know, that trying to make sense of this stuff is a fun but a fool's game.
Yes. We have the wrong tool for the job.
Yeah, wrong tool for the job. And the right tool for the job is in itself, which fortunately you already are,
Right.
which is why this stuff is actually engageable.
Right.
Because even though there's no process or medium or tool to engage it, since you are it, you can still engage it anyway.
Yeah.
Regardless of apparent tool or process or lack thereof.
Because you are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of some things I said before, which is that as soon as you put a definition on what appears, then the readout is screwed.
Yeah, yeah, it becomes solidified.
Yeah, so the
It stops being a readout and it becomes a thing itself. It's almost, I mean, it's a terrible analogy, but it's as if you thought the speedometer in your car was the car driving on the road. You know, it's just a readout. It's like an indicator of something that is beyond it. But, and yet it is because of what is beyond it. And it's not really beyond in a simplistic sense or in a mechanistic sense.
So then touching on the idea of paradox, and this has just come up, so it might make absolutely no sense. Well, it's in order to know it, you can't define it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a paradox.
To know it, forget about knowing it.
Yeah.
And then you can know it.
So you can receive it by simply being open, which is not receiving. That's a paradox also.
You can be open, you can receive it by seeing that it is open, you are open.
And receiving is let's say, a misnomer.
Sure, for sure.
Because where's it gonna go?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's good.
This is all looking to me, I'm picturing as kind of electrical current.
Uh-huh.
And so I was just wondering about the things the Hindus talk about with the Kundalini and the Shakti. Are they like electrical surges, perhaps?
Uh-huh.
I'm kind of seeing that might.
I don't recommend getting too literal with that, with, you know, Kundalini as electrical current buildups or whatever. You know, if you think of it in terms of quantum mechanics, it's probably better. Where the electrical potential is kind of a readout of electrons that aren't really there, that are probability fields.
Okay.
And so you have the electrical potential, you have the electricity, but it's not really that. It's really, you know, potentials of probabilities.
Sure. Okay.
And yet it is.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know. Yeah,
It makes more sense.
Try to zero in on this stuff is.
The more senseless it is, the more accurate.
Yeah. Just think paradox and you're good.
Yeah.
So it can look at itself. It looks at itself.
It looks at itself, yes. It sees nothing but itself.
That's amazing.
Yeah. That's what this is, it looking at itself. This is what it looking at itself happens to look like. And yet you can't say what this looks like.
I think in the same way, no matter what you do say that it looks like is also correct.
Sure, absolutely.
You can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong. Absolutely, cannot go wrong. You never depart from exactly dead center. No matter where you go. You go anywhere you want and you never move from dead center. You know, what bothers us up in playing with this stuff is the habits of either or thought. You know, this or that, here or there. You know, this actuality in no way works like that. You know, so when you think, well, you know, I want to get there, and I want to go from here to there, and where is here and where is there? None of that even applies. You know, it's completely both and. You know, it never goes anywhere and it goes everywhere, and those two are the same thing. It's not like there's two conditions that coexist. It's like those are two ways of saying the same condition.
So the patterning is not a division of itself.
No, it's an appearance, you could say. It's a readout. I mean, I keep going to this word readout. To me, it seems, I don't know, it's probably not very good, but it seems meaningful. Because it's a display of something else that is not actually that, and yet the display is nothing but that.
Could it be like displaying the I forget how you describe quantum, the possibilities? It's displaying the possibilities.
Yeah, in a way, sure, for sure. Yeah. You know, it's like different snapshots of itself. I mean, you know, in one sense, you know, I don't know if any of you are sci-fi fans of science fiction or anything like that, or of you know, sort of speculative science, but ideas of hyperspace work really well with this. So when you get you know, sort of hyperspatial dimensions where the three-dimensional readout is of something that is not three-dimensional, it's more than that, but if you see it in three-dimensional terms, it looks like this without actually being this. You know, to me, that kind of resonates. You know, there is a condition which alone exists, which happens to look like this, but which isn't like this. And yet this looks like this because it is like it is. Anyway.
And so this would be only one dimension.
Jeff, you opened a can of worms. So no wonder we're fishing.
So it looks like this in this dimension.
Yeah, you could say that. If there was a this dimension, because the this that it looks like is arbitrary. You know, what dimension it seems to be at any moment. I mean, that's what we're talking about, these different you know, ways of different sort of perspectives. They're all sort of different dimensions of this, different views of the same thing, different readouts of the same thing. But the thing itself is not actually like any of the readouts, but the readouts indicate it.
And you can never pin down the thing itself. It's infinite.
Yeah.
There's never any specific to it.
No, it is very specific. It is very specifically what it is.
I'm thinking of your example of when you take your finger and you touch a surface.
Yeah,
That it's sort of infinite in its nature.
that's
There's no-
its readout. Its readout is infinite, and its nature is infinite. But it is very specifically and very precisely exactly this, exactly what it is. I mean, that's why it's knowable. That's why realization is possible. It can recognize itself because it is actually supremely specific.
But
And you can't say what that specificity
Yeah,
is.
specificity and infinity seem like two opposites.
I know, doesn't it? But it's not. Because that which is specific happens to be of a nature that is infinite. And it's specifically that. It's specifically infinite.
And when you say that,
By that, I'm talking about that it is. It is
the big
itself. It is itself.
the
It
big
is,
capital I it.
yeah, there is something, and it is this or that, if you will. And which is exactly, precisely, specifically the way it is. And it is right here, right now, and this is it. But it looks like this, but it isn't actually like this. And yet it's exactly like this. But it blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And it's what we're all kind of here looking for.
Yeah,
Great.
sure.
Looking
Yeah.
for it. That's the funny part.
We're swimming in it.
But looking for it is nice because looking for it is dancing with it, and that's what it does. That's its mode. Its mode is it dances with itself. So being in it, the best way to be with it and to find it and explore it is to be in its mode, which is why playfulness is good, which is why wit is good, which is why sort of craziness, wildness is good, because all these are its modes. So you're kind of you're resonating with its flavors, trying to be locked in and specific and linear and all that. That is aspects of its modes, but that's less globally resonant with its modes. So it tends to pull you more into partialization.
Interesting. I swear you just sort of said that one way of being is more helpful than another, and I wouldn't necessarily think that's the case.
Well, it's not. It depends. More helpful depending on what you want.
Yeah.
There's no. Definability isn't any worse than indefinability. Indefinability is just more globally true, more globally applicable. Definability is a mode of indefinability. But indefinability is more, applies to, in a stronger sense, to the specificity of what this is than definability. Although definability is one of its modes, which is why definability can seem to exist. But undefinability is more powerful than definability because it's more of the global nature of what this is.
Nick, it's also been referred to more as like the don't know mind, right?
Sure.
Be as a little child.
Sure, open-endedness, whatever, free fall. I mean, there's a lot of ways to kind of, indicate it with various degrees of vagueness.
When the door's open.
Astrologically, I'm thinking Uranian as opposed to Saturnian.
Well, all of the planets are its modes, and there's no contradiction. Basically, the farther you get out in the planets, the truer it is to its inherent nature. Plutonian is the truest to this.
Wow.
Even though it's not a planet anymore. I think I'll be.
Sorry, you're not a planet anymore.
Why is that true?
I don't know. It's not literally true.
Like the brain wants to put like perspective or something on it, but what?
I think because the inner planets indicate modes which are more specific and definable, whereas the outer planets indicate modes which are more nebulous and overlapping and global. while still being, but still being there, what they are.
So that's more another.
More another. Voila.
So it just seems like fractal metaphor.
Fractal metaphor.
basically.
Fractal metaphor is good. Fractal metaphor is a lot of mileage out of that. Good magic carpet.
Well, Plutonium would be constant annihilation and rebirth.
Well, if you look at it simplistically,
Hmm.
you know, what Pluto really is to itself is, yeah, it's annihilation, it's rebirth, it's total power, it's total narcissism, you could say, or self-orientation, all of which apply. Mm-hmm.
This is obsessed with it, so.
Completely. And it's all this. This is a readout of its obsession with itself. The self-obsession of actuality is the motive for the cause of existence.
That's why the dream metaphor is just has such great legs.
Yeah. No, the dream metaphor is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
You know, if as long as you don't get too structural with it or too heavy-handed or trying to pin it down too much.
But for dealing with things like specificity and that's apparently there, but clearly not.
Yeah.
Looking for that dream stuff that's not in the dream, but yet it's everything.
The dream is really good because the dreams, even explicitly, although it's hard to remember it from the waking state,
Right.
but within the dream, even what specifically is a certain way isn't really that way. Like I'm either talking to somebody or I'm fishing, and I'm kind of doing both at once. And it doesn't really collapse down to one or the other until I talk about it or think about it.
Like, no, I don't understand what you mean.
In other words, you know, when you wake up and you say, "Oh, I dreamed last night and I was talking to you and we walked into a bar and this blah, blah, blah," that's not really what the dream looked like. That's one version of what the dream looks like, but dreams coexist as multiple versions, some of which can be wildly divergent from themselves concurrently.
Okay.
You know, you can be talking to someone and making love to them and fighting with them and running away from them all at once.
Right.
And it doesn't collapse down to one or the other until you think about it from a waking state or until sort of the dream becomes more solidified or something. But dreams dreams are very, very slippery.
And are they always like that, or is it only
I don't know.
selective memory that?
I don't know. I think that's slippery too. I mean, the whole thing is very weird.
Like when I've gone lucid in dreams and I've taken advantage of checking out something very specific, it doesn't feel like.
Right, because the nature of lucidity is you're pulling in an aspect of the waking perspective, which is by its very nature more defining. It stabilizes.
And that's what's so like flabbergasting about going lucid in the dream is that I'm pulling some.
Yeah, you're having a stable perspective in an absolutely unstable reality, and that feels trippy. It's like, wow.
And yet the paradox in there is that when I stopped to look at that kitchen counter in that dream, it was a fucking kitchen counter.
Oh, yeah.
Detailed.
No, when you go lucid in a dream, it's just like this.
Yeah, just like.
You know, and people who think, "Oh, dreams are sort of fuzzy and vague." It's like, no, your memory of it is fuzzy and vague. A dream can be precisely as detailed. You know, this exactly.
Yeah.
I don't mean like almost this. I mean this.
Yeah.
This real, this precise, this detailed.
That was shocking.
No, it is. When you see it, it's always, you know, every time. I don't have lucid dreams very often. I have semi-lucid dreams very often.
Right.
You know, where I kind of know I'm dreaming, but I'm not really lucid in the dream.
Right.
In fact, I would say all the time. I don't ever really go to sleep anymore.
Yeah.
Really?
I'm always kind of aware. When I sleep, I know I know I'm sleeping, and when I dream, I know I'm dreaming, but not necessarily heavy-handedly. But at any rate, in terms of lucidity, you know, the times that I've gone like sort of hard lucid in the dreams, bang!
Yeah.
It's like it's real, man. I mean, it's this. It is exactly this.
Pops that whole bubble of thinking it as some lugubrious.
Yeah. But I think a lot of that sloppiness comes from the sloppiness of memory, because in the waking state, I remember what I dreamed last night. It's like trying to remember what you had for lunch yesterday. You get the same vagueness.
Yeah.
Whereas the actual lunch was just like this. It was, detailed as hell.
Yeah.
But the memory of the lunch becomes this sort of squishy, ghostly, sketched in thing.
If your lucid dreams are that real, how do you tell what's real and what's not? Like, is there
It's all
something real but not?
No.
So your lucid dreams are just
Experience is real.
Yeah.
If you're dreaming, that's experience, so it's real. If you're awake is a word for experience. Dream is a word for experience. Sleep is a word for experience. Dead is a word for experience.
I mean, if you I always thought, in my head, if you went to sleep every night and your dream picked up where it left off from the night before, you just lived your life like that, how would you possibly tell the difference? Like,
Of course.
there's only a pseudo continuity here, which
Yeah.
makes us call this one the real
Exactly.
one.
And exactly. And continuity, the continuity of the waking state and or the vague degree of continuity, or the more vague degree of continuity in the dream state is really worth looking at. Because continuity is a very interesting thing.
Right.
Because it's not actual.
Yeah.
And yet it's not nothing either. There's something going on there. But again, it's a very cool thing to look at.
Yeah.
Experience is actually very obviously completely discontinuous.
Yeah.
And yet there is this strong degree of apparent continuity. Like, how does that happen?
It's like when you have a dream and the dream starts with a backstory.
Yeah.
Like that's right away. You go here and go, well, what's the difference? Like,
Exactly.
right after lunch yesterday.
No, for sure. Yesterday.
Yeah.
My whole life, 60 years.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows?
that whole time and memory and history thing.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
It seems to morph.
It's like anything. If you don't look at it closely, it's just right there and it's very obvious. It seems like, of course it's real, But when you really look at it closely, it's like, what is that really? Can you really pin it down? It's not nothing, but what it is, all of a sudden, is like, wow.
It turns into kind of miraculous when something's the same as where you quote left it. Like, wow.
Yeah.
It would seem a little more surprising that things actually sort of show up when they're supposed to or where they're supposed to.
Well, it's all completely miraculous. I mean, miracle is the mode of reality. Very literally, what we is human conceptualization. What the word miracle refers to is business as usual. But we're not used to seeing that or noticing that because we have all these overlays of process and cause and effect and time and space and objects and stability and all of that. But in actuality, everything happens simply because miraculously it appears at that instant, so to speak.
Just even suspecting that that's the case, it's like, can be really sort of shocking.
Sure.
It's like, wow. Somebody walks in the door, it's like, whoa, where did that come from?
I mean, you look at, even, anyone, no matter how materialistic and heavy-handed in their modeling of actuality, the functioning of actuality, will acknowledge that there's these bizarre synchronicities and stuff. How's that? Oh, well, the odds are, yes, but it can happen. You're walking down in an airport and you go into the bathroom, you come out of the bathroom and you see someone you haven't seen in 20 years. If you hadn't gone into the bathroom and you'd taken a little bit longer washing your hands, you wouldn't have seen them. And it's like, it's just, it can happen. Sure, it can happen. It does, obviously. Or then you have more explicit, psychic phenomena. The phone rings and you know who it's going to be. You're thinking about a word and someone says it and these kinds of, what a coincidence. That's funny. That was just funny. I was just thinking.
But it's all amazing.
But that's just rubbing your nose in there. But the fact that, that you're sitting there and I'm sitting here and these things are on the table is equally, this is just being done completely miraculously, literally miraculously.
And those glimpses of really how miraculous it is that this just is, the glimpses of that are like, whoa. Just like, there's a vividness to it and an aliveness to it and a whoa, what is that?
Yeah.
To it.
That's the inconceivable power of this, that it is real, that it can create reality.
And it's
And Jesus, what a show of force.
And I'd like to claim that that's what, that's why I come here, that's what I'm looking for. But you've made it clear, like, it's the bigger circle, it's the whoa, as well as the mundane, oh man, I'm not brushing my teeth again. I'm so bored with this.
Because there's no difference, because that is that.
Yeah.
There's no mundane. Kansas is Oz. It's not like leaving something and going somewhere else. There ain't nowhere else. This is that. This is the transcendental. I mean, it is. It is that substantially. It is that functionally. It is that in every way. There's no shred of anything other than miracle here. And that there can seem to be anything other than that is itself miraculous. That it can seem to be non-miraculous is heavy-handed miracle. Wait to see.
Safe travels.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you, Xavier. I'm curious, when Jeff was asking about the percentage human, percentage other that you sort of nominally operated and you were trying to express kind of your version of that. Do you adjust how you communicate and how you show up when you're teaching versus when you're just hanging out, or is it pretty much any difference? Do you do something?
Well,
for us
it's
when
not
you
an
sit up there?
adjusted intentionality.
Okay.
When I'm hanging out, I'm generally just hanging out. I'm a pretty boring guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I sit around, do what I do. Yeah.
Is your perception of when you're here sort of trying to explain this to us, do you sort of, I don't know, I can see that you're trying to explain, you're like an interpreter perhaps, trying to show us something,
Sure,
describe something.
Sure. Yeah, I'm trying to convey, I'm trying to be an intermediary.
And I get the sense, and I've said this before, it's like you convey it on different levels.
Oh, yeah.
You get the verbal going, and our heads are trying to like get it.
Well, the verbal is usually more like a distraction to distract your attention.
Yeah.
And then it's just by sort of energy context that real communication can happen.
Yeah.
But that's the case with everybody. I mean, people don't generally notice it, but words are not very communicative. We sort of hold each other's attention with words, but then there's this whole sort of resonance thing that happens non-verbally. That is where actual communication happens.
It's all sleight of hand.
Yeah, it's all sleight. It's all magic. It's all trickery. Trickery and manipulation.
Bring it on. We'll take it.
I kind of think that trickery and manipulation is what's appearing.
Absolutely. I mean, that's its mode. Its mode is deceptive revelation. Every aspect of its apparition is deceptive, and every aspect of it is revelatory. So again, of course, naturally it's very paradoxical. But that's what we got.
So like it's getting,
Sorry?
so the objects that we see could be akin to the words that you speak. It's not,
Right,
that's not where the message is,
right, exactly so,
you know? That's the
exactly,
trickery.
exactly. Objects and the field of experience is like an interface point of what's completely beyond that with what's completely beyond that. That's a good way to put it. And I guess what I meant by readout.
This seems to be very busy.
This seems to be very busy, and it is not doing anything at all. It's like when you dream, you know, it can be very busy and there's nothing happening.
It's funny, that very busy comment, like, it's really starting to become apparent that any overt manipulation of what's going on out there is not particularly effective. Like, it seems like there's the ability to make choices or change this or change that, whatever, but that overt manipulation isn't really what.
Because that's not where events takes place.
Yeah.
That's another reason why I call it readout. It looks like this pushes that and then it moves, but that's not where the event's taking place. The pushing isn't happening here and the moving isn't happening here. It looks like the readout is here, but that's not where the event is.
It seems like the big lie is that if I, just manipulate this or adjust that, then I can.
Well, sure. I mean, that's
I think I will.
that's the naive paradigm, and this is the way this learns about itself. Is it adopts that naive paradigm and plays with itself on that basis, and that's a vehicle for discovery. And it eventually discovers that, wait a minute, there's something else going on here,
It's
and it
funny.
begins to check it out.
Yeah, it's like, all right, hands off.
Yeah.
Let's just stop the manipulation.
Yeah, it's hands off, but it's not necessarily. It doesn't need to be hands off. It's just not that, without needing to stop being that.
Well, yesterday,
It's taking place somewhere else. So whether or not there's overt manipulation, it isn't really overt manipulation, so it's irrelevant. It's not like you need to go passive or something.
I've tended to think, like Nan, that we need to be hands off. But then yesterday you were talking about how we can, play with our experience.
Sure.
So I thought, well, then trying to manipulate your experience is part of playing with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's manifest infinite degrees of participation with experience. So, needing to adopt a passive stance of, I'm the observer and everything's happening by itself. I mean, that's fine. That's one perspective, but that's not the truth. But that you are doing everything is one perspective, and it's not the truth either.
Mm-hmm.
But neither of those modes is excluded, because the truth can look like either of those, or both, and or none of the above. So there's nothing excluded. Nothing is off the table. Action is not off the table. Participation is not off the table. Willfulness is not off the table. Manipulation is not off the table. Passive, transcendental, what's the word? Witnessing is not off the table.
Surrender.
But they're all modes for discovering that this is other than that. This is more and other than that, without necessarily needing to not be that, without needing to negate that or cancel it or erase it. So normal functioning is not normal functioning without needing to be non-normal functioning. In other words, normal functioning is more than that but it doesn't need to stop being normal functioning to be more than that. It already is. So it's a matter of seeing. It's not a matter of changing anything. I mean, one very, probably very bad analogy is as if everything that happened was a shadow being cast by a light source somewhere else and a movement somewhere else. And so I move my hand and it pushes the glass and the glass moves. But there's no glass here, there's no hand. These are the shadows of something that's happening. There's a movement up here and a light, and it happens to look like this. I mean, that's not literally true, but it's a metaphor. Yeah.
Some physicists would tell you that is true.
Huh?
Some physicists might tell you that is true.
Well,
Holographic universe and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, well, it's kind of true, but it's not true.
Right.
It's kind of true, but it's not actually literally like that.
Right.
But it's a nice way to get that. Forget it.
It's back to readout again. It's a nice way to describe the readout.
Yeah, I mean, to me, readout is really. I mean, to me, I say that and it just carries a whole shitload of meaning.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems it's just like this. Yeah, that's hitting so many nails right on the head.
Yeah.
And I can't really explain why.
Yeah.
But it's just a readout of
something that's not here.
Yeah. Well, it's not here,
Not here.
but it's more and other than this.
What appears, which could be akin to the shadow, is not it.
Well, it is it, but it is not that.
Yeah. Then let's say that it doesn't have the fullness of it.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
It's more and other.
Yes, exactly. So. More and other. More and other is a good knee-jerk, formula.
I know, I learned it from you.
I mean, if in doubt, you can always take the more and other formula and throw it on anything, and you'll get some mileage out of it. It's got a significant whammy.
Which can be abbreviated to mother.
Oh.
I don't like it anymore. Yeah. Not back to my mother.
Well, this has been fun, Jeff. Thanks for stirring things up.
Sure.
Sure.
It gets boring after a while, my life and what I've done and how I feel about shit. And it's like on and on. So, I mean, as luscious as it is, it's fun to explore, our experience from a different kind of vocabulary.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Well, the normal world is just so completely wrapped up in my life and my stuff and what I'm going to do next. It's just.
Well, we have a habit of habitual addiction to this dullness of normalcy of things being what we think they are, and it's this wet blanket of whatever. It isn't really even there. And it can be fun to notice it's not even really there. Yeah.
So you talked about transmission, and a lot of other teachers have talked about that.
Uh-huh.
So you're here, like, I guess you could say, or we would say purposefully,
Sure.
doing that. Now, if you're like riding on the bus, are you like, just polluting the airspace around you guys too?
Smelling up the place.
Unlawful transmission?
Yeah, check with the FCC.
No, it's strictly by invitation.
That's why I thought you had to be like,
Transmission is more like being a vampire or a parasite on the part of the recipient.
Oh, we're sucking you dry.
Yeah. It's not literally that, but it's more like that. They're like that I'm some some radio station that's like sending a magical wave.
Well, you see some people and you're just like, that guy looks like he's just having a bad day, and it's sort of like,
Sure.
that's like a bad before about them. I'm just curious.
Well,
But I thought then too, probably has to have like some sort of,
well, connection can only happen if there's a connection,
yeah,
is the thing. It can't be contrived. So you can't just do it because you want to do it.
yeah.
But if there is a connection, then all of a sudden there's a channel and you never know what's going to flow across it. I mean, it's, spiritual teaching, or let's just call it spiritual engagement on any level, genuine spiritual engagement can't occur unless there's some connection. It can't be, it's not mechanical. You can't just set up I mean, that's the fallacy of sort of assembly line spirituality, where, take a number and take a cushion and sit down and meditate for 3 hours and, you're in the machine and it's going to work. You have to have a connection. It's kind of like plugging a heater into the wall, or having your internet hooked up to, having a computer hooked up to the Wi-Fi or whatever. You have to have a connection. And once there's a connection, then something can like flow. Something can happen. And the connection can't be contrived. It's inherent in the energy system, you might say. Which is why some people are your friends and some people are non-entities to you. And it's not because you want them to be. It's just that's what you find. It's the nature of the beast. It's just the flavor that is there. And so that flavor is all about. That flavor is what enables something actual to happen. So it's all about connection. When there's connection, then all of a sudden, it's like the circuit's hooked up, and then you don't know what's going to happen. But it's a possibility is enabled.
So when Americans have trouble with the idea of transmission, if there's something special at the front of the room,
Sure.
I don't know, it's different. This is just a reflection, or this is just
I'd say it's largely a reflection of people's paranoia of power structures, of a desire to be what's the word? Not subservient. A desire to be.
it's not a pull.
A desire to have someone above you in a
recognize
hierarchy, or a
their
desire to be above someone else, and/or a paranoia about having someone above you, a fear of having someone above you, or fear of having someone. All of those sort of issues that are associated with fantasies of transmission, but the actuality has nothing to do with anything like that.
Well, you have to
It's more
draw
about-
imaginary, you have to create a lot of frameworks for that to
Yeah.
even get that far.
Exactly.
There's me and there's you.
Yeah,
and
all
there's-
that, and that's not what's really going on. So if that's what you're working with, you're just playing games with yourself anyway, so it doesn't matter.
So you do that with everything that you encounter.
Yeah, of course.
So
This is the mirroring back of what's, I've lost my words.
I mean, in actuality, there's not multiple entities. So the way in which sort of communication and transmission type, quasi-transmission issues and all those kinds of things, what's going on with that again is a very more another transcendental kind of a thing that's not really parsable in terms of you and me and energy and transmission and this or that, or I mean, none of those things are really relevant in actuality. But it can look like that, particularly to sort of a bystander. But you can't know what spirituality really is until it becomes real for you. And it doesn't become real for you until there is, some degree of transmission or recognition or whatever however you want to qualify. And that itself is, is subjective. You can't explain it to someone or justify it to someone, and an external observer isn't going to necessarily see anything happening. And they, why do you guys sit there and talk about this stuff all day? Bullshit. Yeah, it is. But that's not what's happening. That's just what it looks like.
I said two bullshit all day long.
This is much more fun bullshit than the usual workaday bullshit.
Oh, yeah?
This is bullshit by choice. Well, we think. Yeah, never mind. It's just bullshit.
That's
More bullshit.
bravo.
But sometimes the breeze just brings bullshit, you know?
Without end.
I was coming up with some sort of a thought about, you said something about it is knowing itself in this appearance?
Yes.
And in my mind, I created the reason for duality. More bullshit. But so if it wants to know itself, it has to not know itself. It has to come from a place where it doesn't,
Right.
which is why we think we're separate. Because that separateness is required for it to know itself. It has to pretend to be separate.
Right.
You see where I'm going?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I suspect it's not literally true, but I suspect it's somewhat more accurate to say that not that it creates separateness because it needs separateness to know itself, but that its process of being with itself has spin-offs that seem to be separate.
Okay.
But I mean, it's just another way of saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of a readout thing. It's like,
Or it's just like immensely creative.
yeah, oh, that's I mean, that's like across the, that's like the bottom
likes,
line.
you know, like good creativity. I mean, not that there's bad creativity, right? But like really specific kind of custom crafted to one time thing.
Yeah.
It's not like a reproducible.
It presents itself to itself as infinitely differentiated from itself without ever actually becoming different from itself. And within this spectrum of infinite differentiation, of course, there can be any degrees of otherness or identity or conflict or harmony or all possible modes of apparent polarities without ever becoming such because it doesn't ever actually depart from itself. It's like virtual phase differences within a point or something, if that means anything. You know, I mean, the notion that it never departs from itself the tiniest bit, whereas presenting to itself as infinitely differentiated from itself. I mean, it's absurd. It's a paradox. But there you go. You know, again, I mean, you know, go back to a dream analogy. You know, a dream. There's nothing there but one thing: the dreamer, whatever. And yet, it can present as anything with just all sorts of smearing and objectivity and subjectivity and spatiality and temporality and all of these. You know, just this is different than this is different than this is different than this and this is different than this. And yet, there's nothing. There's only one thing there, if that.
And it has all the same qualities. Like sometimes it's loose, it feels lucid. Sometimes
Yeah,
my dreams
yeah.
don't feel any different than reality. Sometimes I'm not even a person. Sometimes you're a woman, four
Sure.
women.
Just like just like now.
But that's how this is. It's just that we kind of somehow.
It's also an advanced form of experiencing.
Sure. I mean, you know, many from many sort of establishment spiritual perspectives, the waking state is the lowest state, or the most deluded state, the most erroneous state. not that it literally is, and not that that's true, but the slipperiness of the dream state, or the deep sleep, or the amorphousness of the deep sleep state, is perhaps, I mean, not literally, but perhaps a truer resonance with the nature of what is there.
Because no one's dead. I mean,
No one's
the
dead.
dead walk.
No one's dead. No one's alive.
And no one's alive.
There's just this. It happens to look like this right now. Well, I don't know about you all, but I'm getting dizzy. Should we knock off for the day? I want to thank you all for coming. I've had a lot of fun this weekend. It's been good. And I hope you've enjoyed it. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
yes, boo them.